Try it again. Everybody able to hear me now? Good morning. We're having a little bit of technical difficulty here. Let me reconnect if I can, and we'll see if we can get rolling. But it is good to see all of you here this morning. Welcome to Grundy Street's Friends and Family Day. That's what today is, and we are most thankful that you are here. We're thankful for your presence this morning. It is such a blessing, and it is such an encouragement to have you here today. On behalf of our elders and our members, all of our guests, our visitors, want to thank you for being here. Want to thank you for coming and being a part of this. And for my Grundy Street peeps, look around you. Faith like a mustard seed. Nothing will be impossible. We are seeing the fruit of our labors come, and so glad that all of us are able to participate in this today. Before we get started with this morning's lesson this morning, I want to introduce this young man that's up here with me. Anderson Judd is the young man that's going to be our associate minister. Starting at the beginning of next year. He's working with us even now on a limited capacity. He's here with us once a month. He'll be here on a more frequent basis than that this summer. He's going to be almost full time with us this summer. He's a very talented speaker, and he's a very diligent student of the scriptures, and so we're glad to have him here. He is a student at Freed-Hardeman, looking to graduate in December of this year, and Lord willing, if all that goes as intended and as planned, he'll be starting with us in January of next year on a full-time basis. So thank you, Anderson, for coming up here. We appreciate having you here, and glad that, oh, by the way, let me go ahead and say, for those of you who are in the young adult category, Tim, that doesn't count for you. So those of you who are in the young adult category, he's going to be teaching that class. So be looking for him when the services are over this morning, the morning service for our Bible study class. You can go with him, and he's got a class prepared for just for you guys. So thank you, brother. Glad you're here with us. And now let's roll right on into our lesson this morning, which is entitled Battling Giants. In the text that Seth read to us earlier, the context of that is that the children of Israel are at a difficult juncture. They have been led out of the land of Egypt. They have been trying to figure out what's going to go on. God's leading them, getting them ready. They have sent at God's command. They have sent spies into the land of promise, and they have come back with, good news and bad news. It's kind of like if those of you who are old enough to remember Hee Haw and Archie Campbell's story where, that's good. No, that's bad. Well, that's kind of where we are here. That they have come back and they talk about, yes, it is indeed a land that flows with milk and honey. We've got some fruit that we brought back. But there's a problem. Well, what's the problem? There be giants in this land. We are like grasshoppers to them. So we're going to talk about that a little bit as we get into the study this morning, because they were very fearful about these people who were they called the sons of Anak. They were afraid of these Nephilim. Now, we may not be dealing with Nephilim today, but we do all deal with our own giants. And so as we go through our lesson this morning, we'll talk a little bit more about those. And so in our study today, I want us to consider the following 3 points. First of all, fear and doubt. The Israelites' response to the spies' reports. They had fears, they had doubts. We'll look at that more in depth in just a moment and see what we can take from their mistakes. Secondly, faith and courage. We're going to look at David's example as he also was challenged by a giant and see how did he handle that? How did he deal with that? And how he dealt with it, of course, was very different from how those Israelites who had just come from the land of Egypt. And then finally, we're going to look at the final point, which is fortified by faith. We're going to talk about how we deal with our giants today, or how we need to deal with them. So let's begin our study by going back to Numbers chapter 13. And we see this idea, this problem of fear and doubt, which was the Israelites' response to the report that the spies brought back of those giants that were in the land. And so let's begin by considering first some background of that account. So based on God's instruction, Moses has sent a man from each tribe, 12 men, in a party, uh, what we might call in today's terms a squad. And they're sent to perform in what we would call in today's military vernacular, we would say they're on a recon mission. They were doing a reconnaissance. They were sent to spy out the land. And that's exactly what the text refers to them as spies. Verses 4 through 16 of the text lists out all of those people who were being selected to go. They had to be leaders of their people, of each of those tribes. And so they were being sent to bring back this news. And specifically, they were also supposed to be identifying what the land is like, whether the people who are there are strong or not, if there are many of them or not, whether the land, I presume he's talking about the soil, is rich or poor, whether there are forests there or not. And then also bring back some of the fruit of the land. We want to see what this place produces. And so verses 21 through 24 discuss where they went and the people that they found there, as well as a listing of the different kinds of fruit that they brought back with them. And we're told in verse 25 that they were gone for 40 days on this mission. This wasn't an overnight trip. This was something that they went fully around through the area that they were going to be sent into. And they came back and they gave their report. In verses 26 through 29 of this text, in Numbers chapter 13, recount the men giving their report to Moses and the people. And in verse 27, they say, "This is indeed a land which flows with milk and honey." And it's, you can see this fruit that we've brought back in there. They're talking about how wonderful it is. But there's a problem. So we go to verse 28, and they drop the other shoe. The people who dwell in this land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. And then here's the big thing, literally. The descendants of Anak are there. There are giants here. They're saying there are giants in this land. Caleb, one of the two men, one of the 12 that was sent, and one of two who came back and said, "We're ready to go. Let's do what God has set before us." Caleb attempts to calm everybody down and tells them that they should go right away and take possession of it. But then notice verse 31 that Seth read to us earlier. But the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against the people because they are too strong for us." The majority of the spies, 10 of them, everybody except Joshua and Caleb, expressed their fear and their doubt about their ability to conquer the land. They focused on the strength of the people who were there, in the inhabitants of the land there, rather than God's promise and his power. And so what we see then is this focus they have on those giants. Notice again how they focus on them in verses 32 and 33. So they brought a bad report of the land which they had spied out to the sons of Israel, saying, "The land through which we have gone to spy out is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people whom we saw in it are people of great stature. We also saw the Nephilim there. The sons of Anak are part of the Nephilim. And we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight." So they focused on these giants. They're fixated on them. And they do that with fear and doubt. We were like grasshoppers next to them. Now, what I would like for us to do, just for a moment, go back to the beginning of the chapter. And I want to note something of particular importance there. verses 1 and 2. Then the Lord, this is who's speaking here, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send out men for yourself to spy out the land of Canaan. Notice the next phrase here, which I am going to give to the sons of Israel. You shall send a man from each of their father's tribes, everyone a leader among them. The Israelites are trembling at these giants in the land instead of looking at them with the faith that they should have had in God's promise to give them the land. God had told them he's giving this to them. This is the same God that exacted plague after plague after plague upon the Egyptians to get them to release the Israelites from their bondage, culminating in the death of every firstborn male of every family, including their livestock. This is the same God that has led them out of Egyptian bondage just a short time before. Scholars believe it was approximately a year before this. This is not something that happened a long time ago. This is still recent. It should still be fresh in their minds. This is the same God that had destroyed Pharaoh and his army in the Red Sea as they were being led across on dry land that they had opened up for the Israelites to walk through on dry land. He has shown them miracle after miracle after miracle, and they still don't trust in his ability to deliver on his promises and to deliver them from any calamity. In spite of everything that God has shown them, they still lack the faith to understand where he's trying to take them. I want us to consider just for a moment a New Testament example with a similar principle. Turn with me to Mark chapter 4. Mark chapter 4, we're going to begin reading at verse 31. Mark chapter 4, beginning at verse 31. On that day, when evening came, he, that is Jesus, he is Jesus here, he said to them, let's go over to the other side. After dismissing the crowd, they took him along with them in the boat, just as he was, and the other boats were with him. And a fierce gale of wind developed, and the waves were breaking over the boat so much that the boat was already filling with water. And yet Jesus himself was in the stern, sleeping on the cushions, and they woke him and said, Teacher, do you not care that we're perishing? And he got up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Hush, be still. And the wind died down and it became perfectly calm. And he said to them, Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? And they became very much afraid and said to one another, Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? As we look at this passage, I want to focus specifically on two verses. Let's go first to verse 40. Jesus asked the disciples, Why are you afraid? Do you not have any faith even now? Does this sound a little bit like what happened with the Israelites? In this case, the giant that the disciples are dealing with is this big storm, right? This big windstorm. They're frightened, and we would understand why that would be. They're afraid they're going to die. They're afraid they're going to die because of this. They're out in the middle of this lake, of this sea, and here's the wind, and they're in this little boat. And oh, by the way, Jesus, he's just sleeping through it all back there. Now let's understand why Jesus chastises them for their lack of faith. Let's go back up to verse 1. Excuse me, back to verse 35, the first verse of our reading here. Verse 35. What did Jesus say to them at the beginning? Let's go over to the other side. You see, when Jesus tells you we're going to do something, it's a foregone conclusion, right? Jesus says we're going to the other side, and they fail to recognize Jesus has already said we're going to get there. Does this sound a little bit like the fact that of what the Israelites were dealing with back in Numbers 13? There at the beginning in verse 2 of our text in Numbers 13, what did God said? You send these spies into the land which I am going to give to the children of Israel. It was a foregone conclusion. It's going to happen. They didn't have to worry about the giants. Now let's kind of shift gears and let's consider an example of someone who fully understood this principle. Let's talk about faith and courage. Let's talk about David's response to the giant, to Goliath. This is in 1 Samuel chapter 17. And this is several generations into the future from where we've been studying just for the last few minutes. The children have taken the land of promise, the children of Israel, but the Philistines are still located there on the border of Israel. And there are still Nephilim among them, including their champion, a giant by the name of Goliath. Big man. In verse 4, we're told that his height is 6 cubits and a span, roughly 9.5 feet tall. For those of our visitors here, I'll tell you, the folks here, they call me Big John, and you probably have no idea why, right? Big John would be as a grasshopper next to a 9.5 foot tall person, right? Remember what the Israelites said, we're like grasshoppers? That's exactly how I'd be next to somebody 9.5 feet tall. My 6'3", yeah, he would have a yard on me, and then some. Verses 5 through 7 describe this armament, its weight, and its massive size. Even think about this spearhead. The spearhead, it says, is 600 shekels of iron. That's 15 pounds. Now, I know 15 pounds doesn't seem like a really heavy weight, but stick it out on the end of a spear and try to control that. This takes a massive man to be able to do that. And so the Philistines have come up against Israel, and they are there in this valley. And on the hillside on one side, the Philistines are all arrayed, and on the hillside on the other side is where the Israelites are. And in the middle, this valley, we might call it no man's land. Neither army is moving to attack the other, but every day, both morning and evening, the Philistines send their champion, Goliath. He comes out and he challenges, defies, it says in the text, the army of Israel to send their champion to fight him in individual combat. And the idea of this is, you send your man out, we're going to fight each other, and whoever wins, the other serves. The loser, the losing team serves the victors. King Saul and the armies of Israel, we see in verse 11 there, much like their forefathers who heard the spies' reports, are trembling in despair and fear until one day David, the son of Jesse, comes to bring food to his brothers who are serving with the armies of Israel. And he hears Goliath's challenge. And in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 26, we read of his reaction. David said to the men who were standing by him, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and rids Israel of their disgrace? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he has dared defy the armies of the living God?" And there's a lot more to this story that we could go into. But the important point that we want to make here is that David, a young man, he's actually not much more than a boy at this point, he determines to take on Goliath because of his confidence in God. David has the utmost confidence in God. David's called to meet with King Saul, and he tells King Saul, "May no one's heart fail on account of him. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine." Well, here's David, barely more than a boy. He's a small man, evidently. He's evidently not, extremely tall in stature. And here's Goliath. And oh, by the way, what he says here, notice what he says. He says, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight him, for you are only a youth, while he has been a warrior since his youth." You're just a little shepherd boy. Go along now. And David says, "Oh, wait a minute. I have routinely dealt with lions and bears. They'll come and try to take my father's sheep, and I'll go snatch the sheep out of their mouth, and when they attack me, I'll kill them." Notice verse 37. He then says, "The Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, he will save me from the hand of this Philistine." So Saul says, Go, and may the Lord be with you. Now, I want you to understand there's something very important here that we need to point out. David is not relying only on his own skill. Notice to whom he attributes this deliverance. He says, the Lord who saved me from the lion, the Lord who saved me from the bear, he's going to be the one who delivers me from this Philistine. He is the one who will protect me. He is the one who will enable me to be victorious. And so we see then that he faces Goliath with faith. He not only declares this confidence in God when speaking with King Saul, he also throws it right into the feet of Goliath when they face each other. Let's read verses 45 through 47 here, 1 Samuel 17. David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and a spear and a saber, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of armies, the God of armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I will strike you and remove your head from you. Then I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild animals of the earth, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that this entire assembly may know that the Lord does not save by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will hand you over to us. There's a song we sing sometimes. The battle belongs to the Lord. The battle belongs to the Lord. Comes right here from what David said as he was speaking to Goliath. So David understood something that the Israelites with Moses did not. And not only them, but also the armies of Israel that are there on the hill behind him. The battle is not theirs to win. It's the Lord's. Notice also what David tells Goliath he's going to do. I'm going to strike you down. I'm going to take your head from you. Do you realize that David didn't even have a sword on at that point? David knew what he was going to do, and he didn't even have the means in his hands yet to do it. But David understood that his victory would come because of his faith in God. And things happened exactly like David said they were going to happen. Let's go on down verses 49 through 51 of our text. David put his hand into his bag, and he took from it a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. And the stone penetrated his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with the sling and the stone. He struck the Philistine and killed him, and there was no sword in David's hand. See, the text even calls that out. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of its sheath and finished him and cut off his head with it. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. David faced Goliath with nothing but a sling and a bag with 5 smooth stones, and it only took one of those stones. And his faith in God gave him the victory. And so this account gives us today, over 3 millennia later, the example that should fortify our faith. Because what we're seeking to do is overcome fear with faith. What's your giant? What is it that you deal with? What is it that you struggle with? No, we don't have Nephilim here today. That doesn't mean that we don't have giants to face. And no, they're not likely to look like the Incredible Hulk that's in this picture up here. Maybe your giant is that frightening diagnosis of an incurable disease. Maybe your Goliath is problems at work, or maybe you've even been laid off from your job. Maybe you're dealing with financial difficulties. Maybe it's the death of a spouse or a close family member who was your anchor. whatever it is, and maybe there are even more than one, we have to recognize the need that we all have to be reliant on God to give us the strength that we need to fight our battles. Notice that notice that God didn't remove Goliath from David's way, but what he gave him was the ability to defeat him. Many of you already know that my first wife died from complications of kidney failure. And due to some complications of this while she was still alive, her bones also became brittle, and she had a fall. She had a fall in which both of her ankles were shattered. And she had to be taken to Erlanger Hospital in Chattanooga and have emergency reconstructive surgery done. And that wasn't the only thing that she dealt with. I remember her boss coming and seeing me in the hospital in Nashville when I was there with her. There were times when he would come to encourage me. Love you, brother. But I received a text that early that morning as I was sitting in the waiting room, waiting for the doctor to come out and give me the report from what happened in the surgery where she was having her ankles reconstructed. This text, I'll never forget this as long as I live. It told me that faith and fear cannot coexist. Where there is faith, there is no fear. Where there is fear, there is no faith. Have faith. Could not have come at a better time for me, that message. The longer I live, the more I believe that this is true. As faith grows, fear diminishes. But where fear thrives, faith is weak. And where there is no faith, there also is no hope. A verse that we looked at briefly last week was Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1. Now, faith is the certainty of things hoped for, or proof of things not seen. That verse is telling us that faith is the basis for our hope. Hope is the house that's built on the foundation of faith. Does that make sense? We have a lot of folks here today who weren't here for that lesson last week, so let's break that word hope down. And hope in the biblical sense can be expressed as a mathematical equation. I don't have it on the slide up there, so I'm going to ask you to listen and hear what I'm telling you. But hope can be expressed mathematically. And some of you are saying, I didn't come in here for a math lesson this morning. It's okay. It's okay. Hope equals desire plus expectation. You got that? Hope equals desire plus expectation. Hope is the combination of the culmination of what I want plus what I believe. What I desire plus my faith. The writer of Hebrews is telling us that our faith provides that certainty of what we hope for, because we not only want it, we trust that we're going to receive it. So just like David had when facing Goliath, we have to face our giants, whatever they are, with faith in God. We have to understand that God will deliver us when we have faith in him to do this. He will deliver us from our giants. We have to understand, though, that his deliverance will be on his time and on his terms. And so, and I've already gone ahead to the second point here, what we also need to do to help continue to build our hope is we need to remember past victories. One way that we strengthen our faith is by remembering how God has been the source, of our help in the past. Let's consider what the psalmist writes in Psalm 77 and verse 1. The psalmist there says, I shall remember the deeds of the Lord. I will certainly remember your wonders of old. When we're challenged, when we face our giants, it's important for us to recall past instances where God has delivered for us just like David did. Remember, that's what David told Saul. This same God who has delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he's going to deliver me also from the hand of this Philistine. David remembered those past victories and looked forward to the next one. The reason their faith failed them when they heard from the spies about the giants in the land is because they did not remember how the Lord had delivered them over and over and over again, and it was so recent, and yet they forgot. And then finally, we also have to remember to rely on God's strength. For God to provide us what we need to face those challenges, to face those giants. Remember, I told you, and you can see it from the text there, God didn't take Goliath out of the way. He just gave him the means to defeat him. David still had to do the work, right? He still had to follow through. Well, the same thing is true for us. But Paul tells us in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 13, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. That we understand that when we look to God for the strength that we need, he will provide it. We do that with faith. We do that with the trust and confidence in him that he's going to provide us what we need. So in closing, the Israelites did not remember what God had done for them. They did not remember how he had delivered them. And as a result, they couldn't understand how it was that they were going to face these giants who were in the land. That they couldn't understand that there wasn't a need to fear those giants because God was giving them the land. What they had to do was follow through and do what God had told them to do. But David understood that. David succeeded through faith. David knew that the battle is the Lord's, and he trusted in him, even as King Saul and the other members of the armies of Israel failed to understand and remember that. So David had no fear. David had no fear when he went and faced Goliath, even though Goliath was twice his size. So what about us? What about our giants? We have to face our own giants with the same faith and the same confidence in God that David had. We can't lose sight that the battle belongs to the Lord. An observation that President Dwight Eisenhower had and that he used to make was, it ain't the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. Anybody ever hear that before? It ain't the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. Well, we're created in God's image. We're not dogs. So maybe a way that we should consider it's not the size of the Christian in the fight, it's the size of the faith in the Christian. Isn't it great how this all ties right back to what we have been talking about since the beginning of the year? I would submit to you that what Jesus tells us in Matthew chapter 17 and verse 20 still applies, that if we can only have faith the size of a mustard seed, nothing will be impossible. So even when we're facing our giants, Just takes a little bit of faith. But we also have to make that faith grow. Now let's talk about, just for a moment as we close up, the elephant in the room, the big giant in the room, the giant that every single one of us in this room faces. Oh, I realize we've all got some different giants. Maybe yours is that incurable disease diagnosis, maybe somebody else's financial problems. But I'll tell you something I know every single person in here deals with, and that's the giant of sin. That's something that we all deal with. And once again, the battle belongs to the Lord. He's already fought that fight for us. He's already defeated that enemy. But what has to happen is that we need to be willing to take advantage of what he has provided for us. What that means is this: through our faithful obedience to his word, the sacrifice that Christ made on the cross provides the means for us to win that battle. The battle belongs to the Lord. Hebrews chapter 5, verses 8 and 9. Though he were a son, yet he learned obedience through the things which he suffered. And having been perfected, he became, notice here, the author, that is the origin of salvation to all who obey him. See that faithful obedience? It's a continuing theme, isn't it? If the children of Israel had just done what God had told them to do, we wouldn't have the next chapters after Numbers 13, the ones where they're tearing their clothes and they're getting all upset and they're ready to stone Joshua and Caleb for standing up and say, we can do this. We wouldn't have those if there had been that faithful obedience there. What will your story be? The story of your battle with the giant of sin. David has a song of encouragement selected for us to sing here in just a moment. This morning, if you have never obeyed the gospel, if you've never put Christ on in baptism, if you've never put your faith in him and repented of your sins, made that change in your life, if you've never done that, if you've never put him on in baptism, washing away your sins, we have the opportunity this morning for you to put the battle in God's hands. The battle belongs to the Lord. What will you do? Will you not come as together we stand as we sing?